Good afternoon. On behalf of our Commandant, Brigadier General Jeremy Sloan, and our Dean, Dr. Chris Hemmer, it is my honor to welcome you to the Air University Hap Arnold Outreach Program event. We sincerely appreciate your support and attendance today. I am Lieutenant Colonel Eli Lozano, a student currently at the Air War College and your MC for this forum. We would like to thank the program developer at the Auburn University Office of Professional and Continuing Education, Mr. Alan Spencer. Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it. For his support in organizing this event. We truly value your partnership and dedication to leader development. Henry Hap Arnold graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1907. My alma mater, so I'm very partial. Just a few years later, the forefathers of aviation, the Wright brothers, taught him to fly. He was one of our nation's earliest military aviators and served with distinctions in World War I and World War II. During World War II, he became the commander of the Army Air Forces and grew the military to 2.5 million soldiers and 75,000 aircraft. Ultimately, he attained the rank of 5-star general, and before his passing in 1950, was named as the first General of the Air Force. Our unique outreach program serves to honor Hap Arnold's legacy and fosters interest in the mission of Air University's Air War College to educate senior military and civilian teammates to serve as critical and strategic thinkers, able to serve as national security senior leaders. The Air War College is accredited by the Southeast Association of Colleges and Schools and by the Chairman and Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Department of Defense. Air War College students represent the top 3% of Air Force officers, along with specialty selected Army, Navy, Marine, and Coast Guard officers. In addition, we also have as part of our student body, senior civilian leaders and international officers. The 240 students complete 10 months of a rigorous academic requirements, earning a master's degree in strategic studies. At the conclusion of their program, our graduates launch into the next phase of their careers as our nation's strategic leaders and senior leaders. What all this means is that our Air War College students are metaphorically high-speed, low-drag, air-cooled, rocket-fueled, and turbocharged, allowing them to fly hypersonic, both academically and intellectually. At this time, you will hear from a panel of our distinguished student leaders who will discuss values-based leadership in challenging times. After the panel members share their stories, we will transition to a question and answer forum in which we hope you have the toughest questions here tonight because they are ready to answer. Without any further ado, it is my privilege to introduce our first speaker. Colonel Mark Tallow serves in the Army National Guard as a Judge Advocate General Officer, which is a lawyer, a military lawyer, and has over 23 years of service. He has completed combat tours in Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and also has extensive operational experience in homeland defense and support to civilian authorities in the United States. Most recently, he commanded the Counter-Drug Task Force for the state of Connecticut. Colonel Tallow holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Criminal Justice from Florida Southern College and a Master's of Law from the University of Virginia and a Juris Doctor from the University of Connecticut. Please help me welcome Colonel Tallow.
Well, thank you very much. We'll all be graduating next Thursday. So tonight is really our last academic requirement. So we're all pretty happy to be here. So take it easy on us when it comes to the question and answer. Really happy to be here. And I want to talk to you tonight a little bit about value-based leadership. And I want to start off by sharing with you the Army warrior ethos, which states, I'll always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit. And I will never leave a fallen comrade. So this ethos is a set of principles by which every soldier hopes to live. I'm going to ask you to keep that in the back of your mind because I hope to circle back to it as we spend a little time here. So as we talk about leadership in today's challenging environment, I want to talk to you tonight about a concept that probably isn't discussed all that often in the context of leadership or leading, and that concept is failure. And so for me, failure is maybe one of the most important aspects of leadership. Now, you've all seen Game of Thrones, and you're all keenly aware that winter's coming, right? So let me tell you, failure's coming, and it's coming for all of us. Now, that would sound a lot more profound and a lot cooler if I could sound like Jon Snow, right, with that cool accent, but I don't have that. And don't yell out what happened. I promised my wife until we get reunited after this, I wouldn't watch any of the Game of Thrones, so no spoilers, please. So most of you never experienced significant failure. And I'm not talking about, going out the night before you've got a big test here at Auburn University or wherever you went to school. Like a no-name place that I did, and you went out for nickel beers with your buddies, and then the next day you bombed the test and you failed. And yeah, nickel beers was something back in 1980-something. Some of you people may remember that. For you young people, ask your mom or your dad or a professor, and if they deny it, they're hiding something, because it was an actual thing. So failure is going to come at you in all parts of your life, in your relationships, and jobs, and opportunities missed, and even in parenthood. And so we all fail at various times in really important aspects of our lives, but what the warrior ethos and the Army values has helped me realize that it's not important that you get knocked down. What's really important about failure is that you face it and you get back up. So I'm going to share 3 words with you, and I'll repeat them. Get up 6. Get up 6. So one of the most important mentors in my life when I was a young man happened to be a guy who served in Vietnam, and he was a close family friend. And he was a coach and a mentor to me, and he used to say that all the time. Mark, you get knocked down 5 times, you get up 6, no excuses. So to him, leadership was about courage and commitment and selfless service, so that when life does knock you down, those principles drive you to get back up and continue the fight. And I think this is especially important when given the privilege of leadership. So let me try to put it into context for you. In 2013, I was in Afghanistan on my last tour in a village in Kunar province, which is northeast section of Afghanistan, right on the Pakistan border. One of our young soldiers in the unit, who was about 19 at the time, befriended a little girl who was maybe 8 or 9 in a nearby village. And he later told me that she reminded him of his little sister back home. Well, one day he gave her a little stuffed animal that he got from the USO and took a couple pictures with her. Now, it was a routine presence patrol in a village we had been through many times. We had never encountered any enemy activity. In fact, all of our intelligence reports indicated the village was friendly towards the United States soldiers and towards our mission. And the enemy was not really active in or around the village. Well, we failed. We failed to understand how quickly things can change and how that random act of kindness can result in so much carnage. See, the enemy was active. And they were in the village. And they saw that act, and they decided that the villagers were a little too friendly to the United States and our cause, so they sent us a message. And they sent a message the only way they know how. That night, they dragged that little girl and her family from their home, and they executed them in the village square for everybody to see, or the equivalent of a village square in Afghanistan. So it was a failure of leadership to not recognize how our actions could have such negative impacts, not only on us and the mission, but also on the people of that village. Certainly it was one of the worst times of my life, and as a leader, perhaps one that would help define me. Now, you got to imagine this incident was pretty crushing, pretty soul-crushing to us. I mean, morale was way down. It really impacted everyone. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out how we were going to act and what we were going to do. We did a lot of soul searching. But we drew on that Army warrior ethos, and the first thing we decided was the mission's first, and we're not going to quit. So the village was located in an area of strategic importance, and it was really vital to the mission that it remained friendly to us. So we had to go back to work at regaining the trust of those village elders. Now, in a Western culture, we probably would have known in 2 or 3 days whether we had succeeded. In Afghanistan, that's not the way it works. They want to talk about everything under the sun before they get down to business. So we met dozens of times, drank endless amounts of chai, which is Afghan tea. I have yet to have a cup of tea since I've been home. And we droned on for hours and hours about our families, about hunting and fishing and America in general. And 3 months later, we succeeded. One of the elders gave us information on those responsible and where they lived. We passed that information on to a special operations task force for further action. Now, it didn't right the wrongs committed, but it showed commitment and courage of the soldiers affected to not quit and to place the mission first. So it's times like this that leadership is vitally important, because the principles and attitude you display to your subordinates will dictate how they react. I refused to accept that evil would triumph over good, and Get Up 6 became the mantra that we lived by and led by. We rallied around that young soldier, too. We cried together, unashamed in the grief and guilt we all felt. We talked a lot about family and home and hunting and fishing and never accepting defeat. And we prayed together. We asked for forgiveness and for wisdom and strength moving forward. I implemented a plan where he was never alone and someone was with him, especially during the downtime. And darkness was not going to eclipse light in our unit. So Matty never quit. He never missed a mission. He was never deterred in his desire to serve and make a difference. He truly lived by the warrior ethos. So that young soldier lives on a ranch now. He's out of the Army. He lives out in West Kansas. And I speak with him from time to time. And about a month ago, I learned he's engaged to be married to his high school sweetheart. And happy to say that I'm very thankful that he's got her in his life, and he's doing really well considering what he's been through. You know, I imagine he lives with this experience every single day of his life. I know few go by that I don't think about it. When I do remember the sting of that failure and hitting rock bottom that day, I also remember the success that followed as we pushed forward together. So as I conclude, I'd ask you to know that failure's coming. No one escapes it. As a leader, you can never accept the defeat he carries with him. You can never quit. And when life knocks you down 5 times, you get up 6. No excuses. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lieutenant Colonel John Popiak, a U.S. Army cyber warfare officer with over 22 years of active federal service. He has commanded company and battalion-level organizations and completed 3 combat tours in Afghanistan. He has also served in staff assignments across the Army and National Security Agency in the Republic of Korea, Europe, and Africa. Colonel Popiak is a graduate of the National Security Agency's Junior Officer Cryptologic Career Program with assignments at NSA Washington and NSA Georgia. He holds a master's degree from Webster University in Information Technology. Please help me welcome Colonel Popiak.
Good evening. It's my privilege to talk to you today about the importance of establishing authentic communication when practicing the Army's core values. Now, the Army's core values are loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. And my particular story begins in the day in 2012 when I was forced to watch a teenage boy kill a puppy, and how it changed my understanding of the application of courage and loyalty, and how authentic communication underpins all of it. Now, in 2012, I was on my 3rd tour in Afghanistan. The first time I went there in 2004, I was very idealistic. I was excited to help bring peace to the world, make America a little safer, and perhaps make Afghanistan a better country. By 2012, my goals included honoring my family and my nation and coming back with all of me intact and in one piece. On that particular deployment in 2012, I was the leader of a special mission unit. Very often, small elements would be sent out at night, often inserted by foot or by helicopter, and we would set up various communication devices and other devices that enable us to find and fix the enemy across Afghanistan. Most of my mission involved myself, my captain named Travis, and a young Army specialist named Specialist Patrick. And we would go out and we would set up what are called hide sites. Hide sites are often just little divots and places that we create in the earth that give us the opportunity once the sun rises to lay low, not be seen, as our goal in such a small element is to not make contact with the adversary. Wait until night falls and then move to an extraction point where, again, we'd either walk out or helicopters would pick us up. And on this particular day in 2012, we'd occupied what we thought was a pretty good hide site. We'd set up our equipment successfully the night before, and we were just making that long wait through daylight, waiting for the sun to set and be extracted. And that's when I noted about 300 feet away from us, a young boy, 12, 13, 14 years old. And at first, you're filled with a great sense of foreboding and nervousness. What if he sees us? What if he stumbles upon us? What are we going to do? And then I noticed that the young boy seemed to be really fixated on something just a little bit away from him. So I started to look to see what he was looking at and realized he was just looking at a small dog, a puppy. Afghanistan's full of stray dogs, and this was one very atypical of the situation. And I saw the young boy bend over, trying to figure out what he's doing, and he picked up a rock. He took the rock and he threw it at the puppy. And at first I saw what I would see if you picked up a tennis ball and threw it to my Weimaraner back home. The puppy thought it was a game. They were playing. The little boy bent down, picked up another rock. His aim steadily improved, and he started to hit the puppy with rocks. And first the puppy would whimper, it would falter, it would get up, whimper a little bit more. The boy kept throwing the rocks. The puppy stopped whimpering. The puppy stopped getting up. The puppy didn't get up anymore. And the whole time I sat there feeling helpless, frustrated, angry, sad, just the full gamut of emotions that can run through you, wondering, what can I do? I can't compromise my position, and I'm watching this horrible act unfold in front of me. And I'm armed, I've got the might of the entire US military behind me, just one radio click away, and I'm literally helpless. It wasn't the first time I'd seen horror in Afghanistan, and unfortunately this wouldn't be the last time that I saw things that would keep me up at night. But for whatever reason, this particular moment stuck with me in a way that I couldn't shake. We were extracted that night, we went back to the base, and as it will happen in Afghanistan, the next mission comes, and the next, and the next. But this one I couldn't get over. It just stayed there, right in the front of my mind. Didn't really talk about it, went to my church services, went out on more and more missions, but I'd catch myself in the shower, picturing that moment crying, breaking down in the shower crying. And it wasn't the best way for a leader to operate. So I did something very small, in my opinion. I reached out to Travis and I reached out to Specialist Patrick, and I opened up about how I was feeling. Leaders don't often do that. We're supposed to be strong, we're supposed to be in charge. Things like that aren't supposed to affect us, and this wasn't the worst that the three of us had seen. And yet, I took a brief moment and I reached out to them. And to my surprise, those men reached back to me with the same feelings of frustration, of sadness, of anger, of hurt, because the moment had stuck with them too. Unfortunately, this is not a great war story, right? Most of them come with wonderful heroes and acts of bravery and really good music that Steven Spielberg has set up to play in the background. And this one is kind of bleak. It's not classic for Hollywood. But I would offer to you that Travis and Specialist Patrick are in fact heroes. They demonstrated the courage to listen when I reached out. They weren't judging. They didn't hide behind a wall of not wanting to share their feelings, but they reached back. And in that moment, we established an authentic connection and communication that allowed us to share the tragedy of what we had seen. And by being brave enough to listen and establish that relationship with me in that moment, they provided me the courage to be able to talk about it when I went home, to be able to sit down with my pastor and talk about it, to stand in front of you tonight and to be able to tell this story and to talk about the two of them. And so why do I share what I think was the heroism of Travis and Specialist Patrick? I do it because we live in an age where we are more connected technologically than we have ever been. All of us before we came in here probably checked our phones, and many of us will immediately check it when we leave. And yet, for as interconnected as we can be, we often fail to communicate with one another. We fail to create the vulnerable situations where we can share moments like I've shared with you and reciprocate with one another in a way that is very meaningful. And I would tell you that I'm a believer that Travis and Specialist Patrick may have saved a life in talking to me and sharing what they did. And that each of you, in your willingness to make those connections, even when it's hard, even when the person's buried in their phone or they've told you they don't want to talk, or the latest ding has come in from an alert from Facebook or Twitter and you're jonesing to check it, that taking the moment to set the device aside and establish that communication could be that difference in saving a life or creating a much better life. Thank you.
Our final distinguished speaker is Colonel Jared Nelson, a United States Air Force officer with 21 years of active duty service. Colonel Nelson received his Air Force commission through the Officer Training School and is a double graduate of the United States Air Force Weapons School. He has served as an instructor and weapons officer and deployed twice to the Middle East in support of Operations Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom. In addition, he has also commanded a squadron of 50 nuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles. I promise you he doesn't have the button on him right now. Colonel Nelson holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in German from the University of Utah and a Master's of Business Administration from Touro University. Please help me welcome our missileer, Colonel Nelson.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Colonel Jared Nelson. My best friends call me Letterman, but that's another story for another night. The Air Force calls me an ICBM operator, but collectively we like to refer to ourselves as missileers, like Colonel Lozano said. Many of you already know that ICBM stands for Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, but you may not know that our nation currently has 400 of them on alert, every day, every hour. We have had since the middle of the Cold War. Each has a nuclear weapon on its tip that has the destructive power of all the bombs dropped in World War II. You may also not know that a Minuteman III is a 3-stage solid rocket-fueled ballistic missile that has been on alert for the past 59 years. The payload exits the atmosphere in 3 minutes, travels a distance of 5,500 miles, re-enters the atmosphere at a speed of 16,000 miles an hour, and then hits a target inside a city block all within about a half an hour. Missileers like to say that we're better than Domino's Pizza. We can deliver the first one in 30 minutes or less, or the next one's free. While operating a weapons system of that much capability, I'm guessing you'd expect me to know my job pretty well. In fact, you may even expect me to be 100% good at my job. Let me assure you that missileers are very good at their jobs, crazy good, in fact. When I started as a missileer 21 years ago, as a second lieutenant, I had memorized so many regulations and facts and figures about how to do my job that I could pass any test the instructors would throw at me with the minimum passing score of 90%, no problem. We all could. That's what we trained to do. Then I arrived at my first duty station in Minot, North Dakota, only to find out that 90% was culturally unacceptable. My leadership demanded scores of 100% on every test, every time. Well, therein lays a problem, because there's a natural conflict between a standard of excellence, you might say is 90%, and a standard of perfection, which is 100%. On one hand, a standard of excellence motivates us to make ourselves even better than we were. But a standard of perfection really only shows that we have motivates us to hide our imperfections. So in my experience, when you're forced between those two, you can either fail to thrive or you're going to find a way to survive. When I was a second lieutenant, we took 3 of those tests every single month. They were for codes, nuclear war orders, and weapons system. As I sat down to write a test one day, I noticed next to me, one of the missileers pulled out a little sheet out of his pocket and compared the answers on his to the answers that were on the sheet. Now, I don't know if he actually transcribed anything onto his sheet or changed any of his answers, but it was clear that he was cheating. So I didn't know what I should do. Here I'm a brand new second lieutenant in a brand new job, and I had just joined the Air Force through officer training school, being taught the Air Force core values of integrity, service, and excellence. I didn't quite know what to do, so I thought about it for just a minute. I had a conflict I had to resolve. I could let it go and just go for the rest of my career knowing that the standard I had just set was acceptable, I could blatantly turn him in, make a name for myself as a brand new guy, or I could quit and do another job. So what I decided to do is that night, or that day, I let all the other students leave the room. And as the instructor, I walked up to the instructor and I told him what I saw. He acted shocked and said he'd take care of it. I walked out the door. Halfway down the hall, my flight commander poked his head out the door and said, "Nelson, get your butt in here." Now, I had no idea what I had done wrong. Later, I found out I was actually impressed by two things: the speed at which my instructor told my flight commander what I did, and that there was an open rebellion against the Air Force core values. So, I entered his office, and for the next 10 or so minutes, he gave me some counseling. Not like the counseling we think of today, but wall-to-wall counseling, spit in your face, that kind of counseling. But by this time, I was a little bit willing to stand my ground for a few reasons. I didn't join the Air Force right out of college. I'd worked for about 10 years. I decided this was the job I wanted to have. So I needed to have this job. In fact, my wife told me at OTS when I called her up telling her I hated this place, she's like, "This is the job you have. I'm home with 2 kids, and this is, if you come home, we're unemployed, so suck it up, buttercup." She's sitting in the back here. So I knew I had to make a go of this job. So largely because of my life experiences and the confidence I'd gained, I stood my ground, took the whipping. He told me that because of me standing my ground, he'd make sure I was never going to be promoted into another leadership position as long as he was in the Air Force. So for the next 3 years, true to his word, I saw all my peers lap me. They became instructors, evaluators, and flight commanders, while I stayed line crew. It was very, very challenging for me to have seen that. And I decided there was one of two things that needed to happen. If I was going to make a go of this job, I needed to either stick around long enough to get a rank or a position with enough influence that I could change the culture that we were experiencing. So for the next 13 years, I searched for the hardest things. For a couple of reasons. I think I needed to prove to myself that I'd done the right thing, and I needed to prove to the Air Force that I was worth keeping around. By April of 2014, I was deployed to Southwest Asia, and I got a call from a boss I'd had about 6 years prior. And he told me, "The strangest thing has happened. I need to hire you to become my chief of safety because the person who was going to come in for that job has just been redirected to a base where there's been a cheating scandal." And I said, "That's interesting. What base was that?" He acknowledged that it was one of the missile bases. So it seems life had come full circle, and I knew this was my chance. I didn't mind being second string quarterback. That's fine. So I went and took the job and eventually became a squadron commander. By the time I returned to North Dakota, the Secretary of the Air Force had become involved, and she recognized that the Air Force missileers had lost the distinction between training and testing. They recognized that it was an environment, a climate of fear. So I returned knowing that about 85% of the things that I thought as a second lieutenant needed to change had already been corrected. So I spent my time making sure those 85% didn't atrophy, and then concentrating on the 15% that we hadn't yet changed. I will tell you that like many difficult challenges, life rarely gives you a final story, and even now some of the areas we've changed are atrophying. But I'm staying in the career field, and I know there's a lot of other people willing to make sure that this does not atrophy back to where it used to be. And I've also learned that integrity is always the best option, and one person with it is a majority. Thank you.